Hi there. Sorry, we got cut off by a mistake. So this is part two of chapter eight of book one. We're continuing Hippodamus account. We got cut off of something. Something. I usually turn my phone off, and what happened was it wasn't off. It started to ring, and I hit the stop button, and it didn't. So again, this is the part two of our discussion of Aristotle's Politics in chapter book two, chapter eight, dealing with Hippodamus. I'm gonna release both videos at the same day, so you get two for one. Oh, I'm mad at myself about this. I wish I was better at editing films. We're finishing off where we left off. We dealt with the overall thing. He talked about the question of judging finally, right? He used a criticism of this. Let's go look at paragraph 13 right here in book chapter 8 of the second book of the Politics. Nor is the law concerning judging a fine one to require one judging to make distinctions when the indictment in such a case is simple, thus making the juror an arbiter. In other words, him making the ruling and the way he suggested doing it in the earlier part is problematic because he should stick to what the indictment. The juror should not be making the charges. It is the juror should only be judging whether they found the person guilty or innocent. The judge here, the juror in the sense. This is the person who's ruling. In that sense, and therefore it shouldn't be dealt by the judge here. Should only be determining the verdict. So there was two things with the verdict. The verdict should be dealt with. Now the question was the earlier verdict thing, was that really only being aimed? Was this a universal principle, all verdict decisions, or only for a Supreme Court decision? Now, I think Aristotle is saying he's treating it as a universal principle, and I think he's maybe right on this. That because maybe again, Hippodamus may not have been precise about this, and because that this is a principle of judging is going to be this way, that what is judged, all judges should behave this way. This was problematic in that sense. He should be only making the ruling. The judge is not supposed to be a juror making a decision should not be an arbiter in that sense. The judge and juror means the same thing in the sense. Whereas today, okay, that's the big thing. In our understanding of a judge, the judge is the person who in the Anglo-Saxon American tradition, and Lord is a translator. That's why he picks the word juror. It's the one who makes the verdict, right? Now, the Roman law, the judge makes the verdict. Okay, this is this. In the Greek situation, the judges are the people making the rule, and it's a huge amount of judges in that sense. It's almost like a jury in that sense. In a sense, that the judge is the one who decides the guilt or innocence. Okay, and that this is more like a juror in the sense. That's why he's translating here. I think the word it would be judge in that sense. And the juror should not be an arbiter in that sense, in that fundamental sense. He should only deal with what was the charge brought forward from this. Um, but it is not possible in the courts, where most legislatures have made provision for the opposite of this, that the jurors do not confer together. In other words, it is not possible in courts where most legislators have made provisions for the opposite of this. In other words, they should do this. That jurors do not confer together. All right. But further, how will the judgment be other than confused when the juror finds something owed, but not as much as claimed by the plaintiff, right? So how is he going to make he's not looking at the question of, let's say, damage claims. He agrees that that the person is owed, but I'm not going to agree that. So instead of letting the claim stay and you judge the claim, that everyone is going to put their own claim, and then what happens? How do you then make the ruling here, right? Um, but not as much as claimed by the plaintiff. He's owed something, but not, he claims 20 minor, but a juror judges a 10 minor, and one more or one less. Another judges 5 and another 4. It is clearly they will split in this way, but others will condemn all for all, and others vote for nothing, right? So, okay, everyone's putting their ruling in there, right? It's going to be a mess to come up with the final judgment. Every person, remember, this is not like this is not a situation where there's only five people. The Athenian courts had hundreds of people, thousands of people in the audience, right? And that therefore they're all going to put their ballots in. That's going to be a how are you going to determine what is the actual ruling? You can also we all find most of them find the majority finds it guilty, but here 20 this way, 20 that way, 20. It's going to be a hard mess. It's going to make things. This is why I think, in a sense, this reinforces confusion. In other words, that's why his previous thing up here above on this right here, I'm at moving. If you see the icon, I mean, if you don't see the icon moving it, there's much confusing over right. There is much confusing here because of this. Now let's go make it even further. Let's now go into this thing, and I'm going to move this like here to like this. He says what? He says, for nothing, right? How will they calculate the votes, right? Moreover, no one compels the one who simply acquits or the condemned to perjure himself, as if the indictment is simple, and justly so. If the indictment is simple, in other words, no one is going to make in other words, the juror is going to perjure himself. Because if the indictment is properly made, it's only when the indictment is confusing and thing, then there's improperly, right? For the one acquitting does not judge that he owes nothing, but that he does not owe the 20 mina. Though the one indeed perjures himself who condemns without believing he owes the 20 mina, right? So therefore, in other words, the question is, it's a limited question. Does this person owe that? If the answer is no, I think he owes him something, but not that, then the answer you must give is no. If the claim is this is Aristotle's point. You stick to what the charge is. If it would be purging if you don't think he doesn't owe 20 mina, and you agreed that he owes something, but he doesn't owe 20 mina. But because I think he owes something, I therefore will perjure myself because I think he's owed something. I would say he owed 20 mina. Okay, that's the only point where you perjure yourself in that sense. That's just a. Now let's go from the judges concerning the matter of those who discover something advantageous to the city. To legislate that they should receive some honor is not safe. Though it sounds appealing, it would involve harassments. Now, this is what's interesting, harassments. Aristotle suggests that the legislation would provide opportunities for judicial harassments or blackmail. This is the great term, psychophante of the wealthy or politically powerful, common phenomena in democratic Athens. Through pretended discovery of a kind of malfeasance, right? This is kind of blackmail. In America today, we have this lawfareism, right? The lawfare, the use of law as a political weapon, and this is kind of blackmail. They do this. Come on, this is blackmail. Lawsuits is blackmail is commonly mechanism of this. If you don't do what I tell you, I mean, this is how Democrats in America operate. If you don't do what I want you to do, I'm going to sue you. I'm going to get all my allies in civil society to sue you. So you have the this is the use of law as a political weapon, and this is dangerous in that sense, as it was, and this is something that is common to very radical democracies. In other words, that once you have a radical democracy, then the courts are used as their weapon to do things. And he says this is the danger. And therefore, it's to do this, then it will be okay. But this is going to end to endless harassments. That it might not well happen. It might not. It might well happen. Change the regime. In other words, if you do this, then people will always innovate, and that may actually lead to change to the regime and instability in the regime. In other words, he says that they will receive honor. This is not say, though it sounds appealing, it would involve, constant agitation to the system. Okay, and people making challenging things to get things better, challenging it. That it might happen, and it might well happen that it changes the regime, right? So therefore, this activity of trying to innovate is going to change the regime. But this leads into another problem of a different investigation. In other words, but this issue, but for some raise the question whether it is harmful or advantageous for cities to change traditional laws. If others ones should be better. In other words, is it harmful? In other words, changing the laws, is it always useful? Is it always beneficial? Even if the laws are not perfect. In other words, this is the question of should you always change law, and even maybe laws are imperfect, but changing the laws always, is this always a good thing? Or is it harmful? Is maybe constantly changing laws could be harmful. Maybe not changing laws too much may be beneficial. In other words, it's a question whether it is harmful or advantageous for cities to change traditional laws. If indeed it is not advantageous, it would not be easy to agree readily with what has been said. But it is not impossible that some might propose the dissolution of a law or the regime as something in the common good. There's dissolution of the law or dissolution of the regime as something in the common good. Since we have made a mention of this, it would be best to expand a bit further on it. In other words, since we've mentioned, in other words, the question of changing laws and should we get rid of this law for the common good, or maybe we should get rid of this element of the regime for the common good, right? This is constantly being talked about. In other words, um, and since this is maybe a minor point, what he says, let's expand on it a little bit. For it involves, as we said, a question, and change might seem to be better. In other words, something might seem to be better. In other words, this has been advantageous at any rate in the other sciences. Medicine, for example, has changed from its traditional ways in gymnastics and the arts and capacities generally, so that political expertise too is to be regarded as one of these. It is clear that the same must necessarily hold concerning this as well. In other words, if political science is a techne, if it's an art in a techne, given that medicine, in other words, today's medicine we don't use leeches. Okay, in other words, there's been evolution, change in the art, and that has led to improvement. Okay, there's other same thing. It makes reference to gymnastics, of how gymnastics. There's been knowledge of the art changes, and that knowledge expands or changes and brings changes to how things are done in the art. Okay, so therefore the question is politics? This is a question: is politics an art in this way? Is it a techne? This is the technes? This is the arts of the craftsman. Is it a techne in this way? And in other words, he says, one might assert that evidence is provided by the facts themselves. The laws of ancient times were overly simple and barbaric, for the Greeks used to carry weapons and purchase their wives from one another. And whatever other ancient ordinances still remain somewhere are together somewhat silly. At Green, for example, there's a law concerning a case of homicide to the effect that the accused shall be guilty of murder if the plaintiff can provide a certain number of witnesses from among his own relatives. Okay, this is an example of this, right? That you're guilty if you can get relatives with a certain number of witnesses among the accused's own relatives, right? In general, all seek not the traditional but the good. So it's not about all laws should seek all reform should change, all change should seek what is good. Not, in other words, the laws should not be maintained because they're traditional. The laws should be preserved or things because they're good laws. The first human beings, whether they were earthborn or preserved from a cataclysm, are likely to have been similar to any chance person or even the simple-minded today. And indeed, it is said of the earthborn. In other words, earthborn. This is what this is. This perhaps alludes to Plato's statesman. The traditional idea of the earthborn, earliest man as earthborn. See Plato's statesman 271a, Menexus the Plato's Menexus, both of them, for the view that if there were survivors of a universal catechism, see the laws. So that this idea of this he's actually addressing two different Platonic positions here. Um, so in other words, if this is only said about those the system, or even said about the European, so it would be odd to abide by the opinion they hold. Um, um, so therefore, if humans were like this, and they couldn't have any change of any person, even so simple. In other words, he said this, the first human beings, whether are born or preserved by catechism, are likely uh, to have been similar to any chance person, or even or even the simple-minded today, as indeed is the earthborn. Right? So it would be odd to abide by the opinions they hold. These people hold about this, right? The opinions that people hold. For just as in the case of the other arts, so with respect to political arrangement, it is impossible for everything to be written down precisely. So in other words, some arts, and if this is, in other words, sometimes some of the arts you can't get everything written down precisely, and therefore if these can't be, in other words, precision is impossible here. This is more the case in politics than those arts, right? For just as in the case of other arts, so with respect to political arrangements, it is impossible for everything to be written down precisely. For it is necessary to write them in a universal fashion, while actions contain particulars. In other words, when we write and we make procedures of arts and techniques and procedures, you have to do it in very general fashion. In other words, we're trying to create a general norm. This is the problem between the universal and the particular. In other words, ideas and norms and things, and even law, is often at a general level. It's at a universal level. It's common. Whereas sometimes an action is the particular, right? Actions are particular. In other words, a art is a general principle. Actions and human action itself is sometimes very particular in that sense. Okay, he's saying. From these things, it is evident then that some laws must be changed at some times. Yet to those investigating it in another manner, this would seem to require much caution. So in other words, he would say, yes, sometimes it looks at this, if we understand this in a way that sometimes that some laws must be at some times must be changed, right? It's at some times, not all, not always. Laws should be changed. It's only when they're no longer binding or make any sense, or that that what they're doing harms is actually causing harm to the community. A awkward law that produces no real harm, to change it might be just dangerous. In other words, that we change that when we change that in chat, right? So therefore, the question is it doing harm? Is there a real benefit? Not only is there a real benefit, is the wrong that's trying that is present? Is it a harm that is causing? It is a wrong that causing harm, or is this error or this bad obsolete thing causing harm? It like the doctor says, if it's not causing harm, leave it alone. Do no harm, right? Do no harm. There's lots of, and even science, there's lots of things that are like, maybe we don't see that it's not doing good, it's not functioning as it should, but it's not causing any harm. So until it is, they tend to only act when something is causing harm. We know it's causing harm. Now we might be concerned that something's not working normally, but if there's no harm being caused, okay, that's what I mean. This is this idea. In other words, therefore, from these things is evident that some laws must be changed at some times. Yet, to those investigating it in another manner, this would seem to require much caution. So, when the improvement is small, and since it is a bad thing to habituate people to reckless dissolution of their laws, it is evident that some errors, both of the legislature and of the ruler, should let go. Again, this is what I talked about. In other words, if these things are small and they're not causing harm and it's not bad, a bad norm. Because why? Because laws are like habituation. Laws are a form of social habituation, social habits, social mores. And you don't want people, it's very difficult to get people to adopt new ones and to get used to them. and that if you and what happens is if you keep on changing the laws, people don't know what to expect. They're always if the laws are always changing, people aren't always going to take them seriously in that sense, or respect them. In other words, why laws that are well founded are so they become our habit. They become the habits of those who live under them. That's why in Greek nomos is also custom, right? It's law and custom. The original idea is that our customs, our mores, our habits, social habits, these are our laws as well. In other words, these are laws in that fundamental sense. In other words, in other words, it is evident that some errors, both of the legislation and the rulers, should be let go. For the city will not be benefited as much from changing them as it will be harmed through being habituated to disobey the rulers. If you're constantly changing or don't like your rulings, in other words, if there's no harm being caused, the question is by constantly destroying people's attachment or, in other words, people's obedience to what has been decided. In other words, if you keep on saying all the mistakes, then why should we pay attention to what they say, right? This is what he's kind of saying here. They happen. They become habituated in disobeying the rulers or disobeying the law. And the argument from the example of, in other words, and the argument from the example of the arts is false. And this is something he will say again. The argument from the example of the arts is false. In other words, you can't treat politics as an art, a techne. The argument of the arts is the argument of techne. What is true of the art is true. In other words, and this is something Socrates always engages in. He brings, when he wants to compare something, he brings the of politics, particularly of justice and these things. He always then brings the art of something, right? The art of a craftsman, the art of something like. So that here that he's saying what Aristotle's saying here is the argument for the arts, the argument from the example of the arts is false, and returns to this question of political change. In other words, the example we gave earlier about the changes in the arts. It's, in other words, that lead to progress. Well, this is not necessarily the case in politics. Change in art is not like change in law. For law has no strength with respect to obedience apart from habit. This is even more important, and and this is not created except over a period of time. This is very important criticism, and this will be a very important criticism later, because this discussion, this claim that the arts is not the example of the arts is false. He will use it again in Book 3, and I think this is something that it's here that he's challenging Hippodamus. Hippodamus treats politics as though it's a technique. It's a simple technique. It's a science in a sense. Aristotle says, and therefore, like a technique, changes knowledge better. No, it's not like the arts. He says, change here is not like the arts. Why? A change in law, the law has no strength with respect to obedience apart from habit. This is the idea of human habits, human association, no mores. This is the interconnection between laws and mores. This is why Tocqueville is so wonderful. Tocqueville is kind of, this is the Aristotelian characteristic of Tocqueville. This interconnection of laws and mores and laws, right? Social habits and laws, they fundamentally connect. Okay, habits are what, in fact, habits are often said to be, for Aristotle in the Ethics, you call habits a second nature, right? Our habits are our second nature. This is they're man-made, like nomos. Nomos is convention, man. It's a thing that is conventionally made. It's our habit. Normous, but it can also be indicating what is within nature itself. It's giving form and manifestation, fulfilling what is in nature itself too. That's what habits are. Habits are things we do to help us to achieve, to fulfill what's in our potential as the animal we are. the type of and natural being we are. So this is what is important, and habit is created or except over through time. Therefore, you're changing laws so willy-nilly constantly, innovating laws every time, may ultimately undermine the people's confidence and faith in laws in that sense. And they're not habituated to them. They don't respect it. In other words, they don't. The laws aren't part of their lives in that sense, and there's a disconnect. And the laws become something that's out there, different than us, and that people have no longer attachment to the laws, and therefore they have no authority over. People don't feel that they are bound by them. They're not bound by them, and this is the criticism. In other words, this constantly trying to improve things ultimately will lead to the undoing because people's expectations will be such that you can never satisfy them, and two, that people no longer have any attachment to the laws. The laws and the social legal. Remember what the law. What are laws? Laws are for the community you're in, the society you're in, the political entity you're in. These are the social habits. These are the social mores. The social. This is the. These are the norms and the rules by which the system is going to and your life in that system will operate by. Hence, the easy alteration of existing law in favor of new and different ones weakens the power of law itself. And this is the powerful ending of the Hippodamus critique. Further, if they are indeed to be changeable, are all to be, and in every regime. In other words, here he says that law and regimes. He hints here that laws and regimes are kind of interconnected. He hasn't explained how yet. In other words, if in other words, he says further, if these things are to be laws are to be constantly changeable, are they all the laws supposed to changeable? Not only just weird ones, old ones, but all laws can be changeable. In other words, he suggested that maybe it shouldn't be, right? And the argument why you should be careful about changing laws. But going back to the larger question, if the laws are going to be changeable, are all laws? And also, is this true for all regimes? Right? And by anyone or by whom? Who's to do the change? This is not clear. Who's allowed to change? Is everyone can do it, or only for certain people? No, Hippodamus doesn't address this question by, and these last things are kind of Aristotle's very specific critique of the failure of Hippodamus's critique to address these very important points. Let us therefore set aside this investigation at present. It belongs to another occasion, and this is what's interesting. 69, he never gives us that other occasion. Okay? This is one of famous Aristotle's things. Oh, let's talk about this another occasion. But he never does. My throat is giving out, so this is a good time to. I should drink something. This is a good time to end the thing. We end the chapter. Sorry about that. I got hit something. Something got in the throat. I don't know what happened. My sinus, covers the line, covers the larynx a little bit, and it makes funny sounds. So we're going to end here. We could stop today. And this is part 2. So you got 2 videos for the price of 1. Our next time we'll look at chapter 9, which moves finally to actual regimes. Okay? So that's it. We'll stop here, and I will let you go. Again, if you liked it, you can go like the other one. Go. I didn't have an ending like this. If I could edit things, I'd edit this little thing. I'd do a video talking about how you can do this one time and I'd do it all the time. Again, I am not that technically capable. I'm good at some things, but not video editing. If you like this video, like it. Put comments below what you liked or questions you have. Any questions regarding the first part or this part, please put the questions in them and I will respond to them. If you have any, if you liked it, dislike it, you can say, nah. Tell me why, what's the problem? Um, Other things. Subscribe and get others to subscribe, please. It's useful to grow a little bit. Um, I'm doing this as kind of like a lifetime, achievement thing of doing the politics. I'm going to go through the politics. Now, some people said, well, why don't you give some more secondary stuff? Well, if you put questions about secondary material and any of the things, when I see them, I will write them about this. I'm just doing this from the text. We're going through the text, we're confronting the text, and we're confronting it as the text itself. I'm constantly looking at the Greek. I'm using the Greek. I'm not going to give you the Greek because you'd be lost. Um, I'm using Lord's translation, as you know, because I think it's a good translation because it's close to the Greek. It's like most Greek-like of the text. I have challenges, but there's other translations. There's the Ross the Ross is the Greek. No, the Ross is the manuscript. This famous the Greek text manuscript. But then there's a Dinger's German 1970s German edition that it's more modern and it makes suggestions. Lord tends to not always follow, tends to prefer Ross versus Dinger. Then there's the commentaries, Newman's famous commentary, and there's the Albet's French edition. Um, those are the Greek texts. But then there's English translation. There's Lord's 1984 edition, the first edition. There's CBD Reeve's Hackett edition of both in the 1990s. The first one is more different. The recent new translation he did, which is a different translation. They're very different. It's much, the difference between Reeve's two translations is more stark than that of Lord's. Okay. And then there's Peter Simpson's 1996, I think 96.5, 96 translation of Chapel Hill. It's different from them. It's a good translation, but it rearranges the book 7 and 8 becomes 4 and 5, and 4, 5, and 6 becomes a 6, 7, and 8. They reversed the ordering of the books, and as some German scholars in the 20th, 19th, they later have 19th century recommended. And then there is Joe Sachs, the great Sachs, and his very good translations of the physics and the metaphysics and those odd works. Did and gave a trans in the early 2000s the ethics, which a decade later came with the Chicago edition of the more literal translation. But he also in 2013 gave a translation of the Politics. And also, there's one by Lawrence Burns, and there's other translations. There's like lots of translations out there. I know them all. I mean, I've studied. I spent my life studying. I should do a video about that a little bit. Someone says. Um, well, that's the translation of why we're doing this. So you put comments on this. I'm looking at that. I'm not always highlighting it because it's too little technical. I mean, not interesting the reader of trying to understand these texts up at this level for you guys. You can follow me on social media, so get people to subscribe. You can follow me on social media below. The links are below. Um, um, the Another thing is you can want to help if you want to help me do more, maybe get better equipment and things like that. Maybe even hire somebody to help me do some things. Okay, but I don't know. I have one Subscribe Star member. I think he's going to quit soon because we haven't done much. And Subscribe Star and Pro Patreon on there. Or another way you can help me is to go just buy my. This is not a commentary. This is not. You can buy my commentaries. You buy my. I don't see the money right. I get very little money for it. If you buy this, I see money immediately. Not necessarily right in my pocket immediately, but the publisher, Lulu, will gets me. And if you buy it by Lulu, I see more of it because if you buy it by Amazon and other places, Amazon makes a profit from it, and, where Lulu will give me the profit that Amazon makes. Um, but Lulu, I understand why people won't buy Lulu because they charge you for the transport, and people might say, "Well, I don't want to get the transport. the pub, Amazon and those places give me free shipping, so whatever. Okay, just and however you get it, buy it, I'll get something from it. That's why you can help this. This is a notebook on Aristotle's politics, very relevant to what we're doing here. It's a commentary, and maybe I should stop hawking it. I always think that I talk it at the end, simply as a recommendation that people do it. It's good as it's a Cliff's notes on the politics. It is not a commentary. It's not a substitute of reading the text. It's a guide to help you to understand and read the text better. Okay, it offers kind of frameworks, charts, structures of outlines of things of various sections of the chapters, of the books and chapters. I examine them to some degree. Often outlines and links and charts. Okay, and then also some a bibliography on the various literature, on the secondary literature. If you're a student, this is great for a student. It's great for someone who's just a student doing it himself. It's okay. It's $30. I understand it's about $28, $30. I understand. Oh, it's gonna be more expensive. I I went with Lulu rather than a major publisher because the major publishers all wanted to sell it for $150, $200 students. I made this for students. Okay? This is the purpose of this thing. It's a guide to help students go through the politics. So you want to help me, you can buy that. It's a good book. It's worth doing. I'm and I'm going to eventually make a new edition of it because I'm always, as I go over this thing, I found some points where I can add more things to it. But I'm not going to do that next. Probably I'm going to wait a year or two before I do that. Because it's second edition. Maybe I'll call it. No, I won't be doing that. Again, that's what I did. So that's it for today. I'll let you go. I'm talking more than this. Because I feel I botched up today's video, so we'll stop here. Okay, take care and have a good